Star trail images are one of the best ways to depict the rotation of Earth on its axis. As Earth spins, the stars appear to turn circles in the sky overhead, and this motion is normally too slow to see with the naked eye, but is unveiled beautifully in an extreme long exposure. What's great about star trails is that you can even do them from heavily light polluted areas, as your camera will pick up way more stars than you can see with your naked eye. So first, let's start with the gear. You're going to need a camera, whether that's a DSLR or a mirrorless, it doesn't really matter. Even some smartphones can do star trails these days. Next is a wide angle lens. I typically shoot at 14mm, 20mm, maybe 24mm, but don't be afraid to experiment with longer focal lengths as well. You're also going to need a tripod to hold your camera steady, but if you don't have one, you could just rest your camera on any flat surface, even a windowsill. And if your camera doesn't have one built in, you're going to need an intervalometer. This basically allows you to program multiple shots taken at a chosen interval. And there's a couple of extra bits of kit as well. If you really want to go for long times, then you may need some sort of external power source. On my Sony camera, I can simply plug in a USB battery and that will power my camera all night. If your camera doesn't support USB charging, then you may need to look into buying a dummy battery, which you can then plug into some sort of 12-volt power supply. I stick my USB battery along with the intervalometer to my tripod using little Velcro tabs. Another optional bit of kit is a lens warmer. This will keep your lens nice and warm and prevent condensation from forming on the front lens. Okay, let's talk about the camera's settings. Now, some people actually shoot 1 hour, 2 hour, maybe 3 hour long single exposures, but for me that's way too risky. If something goes wrong halfway through, you've lost everything. And furthermore, if it's not freezing cold outside, your sensor's going to get so hot that you'll have lots of thermal noise in the final image. That's why I much prefer to shoot multiple shorter exposures. Some people like to do 4 minutes or 5 minutes because it means you have less images to stack later on in post-processing. But for me personally, I like to stick to 20 to 30 seconds, basically the star trail limit of my lens. That way I can turn those images into a time-lapse video later on as well, so I'm getting 2 for the price of 1. And if a huge meteor falls into the frame, you have an image with a meteor and nice round pin-sharp stars. So yeah, with the shutter speed, just stick to the star trailing limit. A nice quick and easy way to work this out is something called the 500 rule. You basically take 500 divided by the focal length of the lens that you're using. So if I'm shooting on my 20mm lens, I do 500 divided by 20, comes out about 25 seconds. 500 only works for full frame cameras. If you're shooting on a crop sensor camera, just replace 500 for 300. And if you're shooting on a micro four thirds camera, just swap 500 for 250 instead. As for the ISO and the aperture, it depends on what kind of environment you're shooting from. So if you're in a dark, rural environment, you can shoot at f2.8 to f3.5 and an ISO of 1600 to 3200. If you're in more of an urban environment with a lot of light pollution, you can step down to f4 to f5.6 and use a lower ISO of about 800. Now that I've got my settings dialed in, it's time to focus. So you should aim your camera towards a bright star or a planet. For me, I have Venus available right now. So now I'm going to digitally zoom onto Venus and zoom again. And now I'm just going to focus manually until Venus is as small and as sharp as possible. There. If you're struggling to find a bright star or a planet on the rear LCD, you can use a distant street light. That should be enough to get you in pretty good focus. And then once you're focused, it's time to choose your composition. The direction you face will influence the pattern you see in the star trails. So if you face north in the northern hemisphere, you will get concentric circles. In the middle of those concentric circles, you'll find Polaris, the North Star. And the point directly in the center is known as the North Celestial Pole. This is the point in the night sky that Earth's axis of rotation points at, so as Earth spins, all of the stars appear to turn circles around this point. If you want to get concentric circles from the southern hemisphere, then you'll have to face south. If you face east or west, you'll have divergent arcs, and the straight line that emanates from the east or the west is known as the celestial equator. It's the point of the night sky that's directly above Earth's equator. And lastly, facing south from the northern hemisphere, you will see arcs stretching over the horizon. But if you're in the southern hemisphere, this is what you'll get if you are facing north. Lastly, we need to program the intervalometer. Now, if your camera has one built in, check the manual for instructions on that, but also check that it saves the individual exposures, because some camera manufacturers only make a video file when you use the intervalometer mode. So make sure that it saves the RAW files or the JPEGs as well. Otherwise, you can use an external intervalometer, and I'll show you how to set it up. I'm going to scroll across until I see delay in the top corner. I don't need a delay on this, so I'm going to leave it set to 0. And then long is how long you want the shutter to be. So I've set mine to 25 seconds, but you have to make sure that your camera is set to bulb. The shutter speed is set to bulb so that the intervalometer can control the shutter speed. Next is the interval. This is the time between the end of one shot and the start of the next. I've got a really good memory card and a fairly new camera, so I can get away with 1 second here, but you may want to do 2 seconds or 3 seconds just to be safe. Make sure you have long exposure noise reduction turned off, otherwise you'll have to wait a long period of time between each image. N1 is the number of shots to take, and I leave this at 999 so that it just keeps taking photographs until I tell it to stop. Then you have repeat for 1 second and N2 for 1. You can basically repeat those 999 shots, but in this example I don't need to. So I'm just going to leave that to 1 and 1. And we're off. We better hope that cloud disappears and stays away as well. But guys, if you found this video useful so far, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below and give the bell a little ring so you get notified when I make more videos like this. So now I've brought all of my images into Lightroom. Now if you shoot in JPEG or you don't have Lightroom, you can skip all this and jump forward to whatever time is on the screen right now. In Lightroom, I'm not going to do that much. So I'm just going to take one of the images. I might lift the shadows a little bit, lift the blacks, just so it looks better for the time-lapse later on, and maybe recover a little bit of the highlights. I'm also going to set a custom white balance just to make sure all of the images have the same white balance, and I'm just going to leave it there for now, but you can change to your own taste. Next up, I'm going to come down to lens correction, and make sure you tick remove chromatic aberration. This basically gets rid of some of the color fringing on the stars, and it'll give you a cleaner result. My lens is pretty good, so I don't have much chromatic aberration, but if you see colors on the edge of the stars and this tick box doesn't fix that problem, you have to come into manual, and then you can extend the range of colors that you affect and then change the amount to like 1 or 2, and that should fix the color fringing on your stars. But in my case, I don't need it, so I'm just going to reset those to 0. But make sure you tick remove chromatic aberration, and do not tick enable profile correction. If you tick that, you'll end up with a really weird pattern after you've stacked your images. So if you want to do profile correction, do it after the stack. Now I'm going to press Ctrl A to select all of the images, and you'll see in the film strip below that they're all white. And then I'm going to press sync, and then press check all just to make sure you've checked everything, and then synchronize. Once all the settings are finished syncing, you're going to come up to File and then Export. Make sure you've got all the images selected, by the way. And then I'm going to put them in my D drive, put them in a subfolder called Garden Trails. And then the image format, I'm going to change to TIFF to keep all of that raw information. No compression, sRGB color space, 16-bit color depth because I shot in 16-bit on my camera. No resizing, I want full-size images. And there's no need to sharpen at this point either, so I'm going to turn the sharpening off. And then click Export. Now to do the stacking, I'm going to be using a free program called Star Stacks. So I'm just going to drag all of the images into Star Stacks. And then in the blending mode up the top right corner, I'm going to be using gap filling because that does a really good job of filling in the gaps between the stars, so you get nice smooth star trails. And then once you've done that, you can click on this icon here to start processing.
A few moments later.
Okay, now that it's finished stacking, we're going to do the gap filling. So the first thing you want to do is tick the show threshold overlay, and you'll see that everything goes green. So you basically want to adjust the threshold until you've kind of got most of the trails highlighted in green. And it doesn't matter if you've got a little bit of the foreground. Somewhere about there is fine. And then with the amount, you can just play with this. I normally leave it in the middle, but it'll be worth experimenting, you know, really low, really high, and mid to see what's best for your images. But normally I just leave it in the middle. And then one important step is that when you come up here to save, make sure, so if I just change the name to Garden Trails, make sure you add .tiff. If you don't add .tiff, it will save as a JPEG, so make sure that you add .tiff and then save. Now I'm going to take it into Photoshop, do a little bit of cleaning up and change the foreground as well. So this is the stacked result, and I've also got another layer here, if you see in the bottom right, which I'm going to use for the foreground because there's way too much lights going on in the completely stacked image. So first thing I'm going to do is a little bit of cleanup of the trails. So I'm just going to take the spot removal brush, and I'm going to do this on a new layer. So I'm going to create a new layer. Let's call this spot removal, just in case I need to accidentally fix anything. And once you've got these like straight lines, that was probably a satellite, you can click at one end and then holding shift and clicking at the other end kind of draws a straight line for you. So clicking and then shift clicking, click and then shift click, and then with the little dots that you don't want there, you can just click those to remove them. And there was a meteor up here, that was the final burn up phase there. I'm just going to paint over that. And you can spend a little bit of time cleaning up all of the unwanted trails and specks and hot pixels and whatever else there may be. Now I need to change the foreground, so I'm going to turn on this layer here. The best way to do it is to first select the sky. So I'm going to choose the quick selection tool here, and then I'm just going to brush over the sky quickly, and that's done a pretty good job. It's taken too much of the house, so if I hold Alt or Option on a Mac and just tell it to deselect that little bit of the house there, that's not bad. And then I'm going to come up into Select and Mask. So I'm just going to choose the Refine Edge Brush tool, and I'm just going to refine the edge basically and paint over the edge here. And I'm just going to do this for all the edge, but I might as well just speed up this process for the tutorial. Okay, we've pretty much got the selection now, so I'm just going to hit OK. So the issue now is that I've got the sky selected, but I actually want the foreground selected. So I'm going to press Control, Shift and I to inverse the selection. And then what I'm going to do is, with my foreground layer selected, I'm going to press this button here, the grey or white rectangle with a circle inside it, to add a layer mask. And that basically adds a layer mask which hides the sky of the foreground layer and lets the foreground shine through. So that's the layer mask that we just created, and that basically says delete the sky from the foreground layer but show the foreground part. And we end up with some nice clean star trails and a nice clean foreground as well. At this point you can take the image back into Lightroom or stay in Photoshop and add some finishing touches. Maybe you want to adjust the colors, the white balance and the contrast and the sharpening. But at this point you're pretty much free to edit to your own personal taste. Now guys, I'm going to be honest with you, this is just a basic tutorial for star trails. I actually have a lot of little secrets and little tips that I've put into my workflow over years of experience with shooting star trails, but I'm saving those for a future premium tutorial. But I will be sharing one or two of those secrets with my Patreon followers, so if you want to unlock those, please consider going over to Patreon and perhaps supporting me and this channel, and you'll get other benefits from that as well. But otherwise, I hope you have found this video useful. It should be a good solid basic tutorial to get you guys into star trails. And if you want to do one final favor for me, hit that like button down below and leave a comment below to let me know if you found this video useful or if you have any questions. And if you're going out to enjoy the night sky anytime soon, I wish you good luck and clear skies.